Welcome everyone to episode 54 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts, and today I talked with Stefan Du Randt, who is a mix engineer working out of 301 Studios in Sydney. In this episode, we talked about the difference between working with local indie artists compared to world-class artists, the importance of surrounding yourself with a good community so that you can level up your skills, as well as his light-handed approach to mixing. For all that and heaps more, stay tuned. If you want to help support the podcast, you can make sure that you're followed or subscribed on all the podcast platforms, as well as our social media, so you can stay up to date with everything new in What's That Sound. You can buy some merch, buy a t-shirt via the link in the show notes. You can donate to the podcast. The link to donations are also in the podcast. If you can't afford to do any of that, I totally get it. You can still help by sharing the podcast on your socials or in a conversation. Spread the word. That's the best way that you can help this podcast out as well. And something simple like rating us 5 stars on Spotify, giving us a big thumbs up on YouTube, or rating us on Apple Podcasts as well. That will also help support the podcast. Anyway, with all of that aside, let's get into the episode 54 with Stefan Du Randt. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. Welcome to the podcast, Stefan Du Randt.
Hey man, how's it going?
Doing good. How you doing?
Very good. Last day of work for the year, so.
Yeah, fantastic. Love to hear that. Well, this will be out after the new year, so that's all cool. But people will understand we're here in the old year.
Yeah, we're in the before times.
In the past. Tell us a bit about yourself, man. What do you do in the music industry?
So I work at 301 as like a kind of, my role here is the head of audio. So kind of like a managerial position.
Yep.
And then I also mix music. I mix stereo and Atmos. And then I also actually helping someone design a studio at the moment, which is pretty cool.
Sick.
Or like project managing it, to be more specific.
Nice. That'll give you some new skills.
Yeah. Oh, it's awesome. I haven't been doing this 301 management thing for that long, only like a year, maybe a year and a half. Mm-hmm. So yeah, even that's kind of like really interesting, seeing how this machine works behind the scenes.
I can imagine. It's obviously pretty much the biggest studio in Australia. So pretty cool. Yeah. Well, take us back to when you were a youngin'. Where did music come into play, and what sort of stuff were you listening to, all that sort of thing?
So I'm from South Africa originally, and music was just kind of part of. My dad was really into like 70s rock and stuff like that. So we had I would say hundreds of vinyls, and he played like acoustic guitar and sang.
Cool.
So from a very young age, music was just in my life, all the time. We'd listen to music, on road trips. And I remember it's kind of like some of my earliest memories. And I, I think many kids started playing like recorder when I was like 6 or something.
Yep. Classic. Yep.
Classic. Kids, terrible, out of tune things. And then I played like kind of classical piano as well. Mm-hmm. Which I didn't think was very cool at the time, which I now very much regret.
Yeah. So
I kind of played classical piano for maybe, 6 years or so. It was pretty good. Could read music and everything. And then I just kind of like, that was back when grunge was the thing. And I just got really heavily into guitar, and I would practice, like 8 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And I very specifically remember I had all the Guitar World magazines. I don't know if you remember those.
Love it. Yep.
So good. So it was like playing, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, classical, classic.
Back when that was the only place that you could get tabs.
Tabs, exactly. Tabs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of like yeah, and I played, and then I kind of started joining, friends' bands and things like that.
Hmm.
And that was at the time there was like kind of like pop punk, Green Day, that kind of thing.
Yep.
That kind of more commercial, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, that kind of music. And
Yep.
then, yeah, so I was really into, and then as high school kind of rolled around, I got really into just more, No Effects, Pennywise, Bad
Yep.
Religion, that kind of
Yep.
bands.
Sick. Yep.
And then I got really into metal. So it's just
Okay.
like these little periods,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like at a point we were, I had a band in high school that was playing like pop punk. And then like a month later we were playing like Meshuggah kind
Yeah.
of
Right.
riff rock sort of thing.
Straight up change up. Yep.
Yeah. And I played in like the high school band and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
and then I remember reading in one of those Guitar Worlds. Yeah, I had no idea, about recording engineering or anything like that. And I remember there was like an article about it, and that kind of led me to, buying like my first Tascam. So I had,
Yep.
The Tascam Border
Yep.
Studio, and that thing literally changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then I started recording friends' bands, and it was, and that, like, that was the thing where it was like, oh, I actually like doing this more than,
exactly.
because I'm like, like a lot of people who does what we do. I think we're a little bit more introverted than, the front man in a band.
And more geeky.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was always very into the technical part of it. I obviously music is an emotional thing. So there's also that, but yeah, I was just kind of fell head over heels in love with the technology. And, that's kind of when digital audio just began. So I had that, cassette Porter Studio, the 788.
Yep.
And then I got like the digital one, which I still have.
Cool.
I don't have a power supply for it. The shit that would be on there would be, it's like literally the exact same, the metal, the punk, recorded all the local bands.
Yep.
So yeah. And
Love
then from there then I kind of got into more, like Radiohead, Nine Inch Nails, kind of more technology-based production artists. And that's where I kind of started fucking around with Reason, Ableton Live,
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of production, playing in a lot of bands, but was also recording, and had like a little kind of bedroom studio.
Yeah. Cool. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, when you started getting into the production stuff, what did that look like? Like, obviously you were recording with, with Porter Studios and stuff like that, but then when did you start to take it more serious, and what did that look like?
So after school, I basically did like a Berkeley online course, which was like a music production master certificate or something like that. So that had like, more, it was things like Pro Tools 101 and whatever, but it was also like, orchestration, using Reason, like technology to produce music, drum machines, drum programming, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I kind of did that, but I always kept like recording mates' bands for like beer and pizza sort of thing.
Love it. Yeah.
In people's lounge rooms and, that kind of thing. And it was just like really fun. It was like a cool way to, make friends with all the cool bands and hang out and drink beer. And it was a great time. And so I wouldn't say I really took it seriously back then, but I was, after the Berkeley course, I actually built like a little commercial studio in a very cheap kind of part of town. And, I remember my isolation between my control room and live room was like just one piece of drywall. So, it wasn't
Might
good.
as well knock it down.
And I had like 10 tracks, so it wasn't great, but it was cool. Like that was like my first commercial studio.
Yeah.
So I recorded like, heaps of bands in there. So, and it was so cheap. So, you know, I really just kind of like cut my teeth on my own. But I think you kind of like hit a wall when you're just working on your own.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I realized pretty quickly. And yeah.
And I think obviously with a space like that, when you've only got limited, things available, limited people around you, like you said, you're kind of just stuck with what you know, and maybe it feels like you're just like, it's all right, like it's awesome, but I'm kind of not feeling like I'm getting what I want to get out of it, sort of thing. Is that?
Yeah. But I also didn't understand what I wasn't under, like I didn't quite understand. For instance, one thing I specifically remember was like, I had one of those little SSL X desks, and my references would just always be ridiculously loud, and I would also monitored way too loud. Like,
yeah.
So I would have, when I'm mixing, I would have it up way too loud, make these really dynamic mixes.
Yeah.
And then I would put my reference like Foo Fighters or something on it, and would just be like, oh. And I didn't understand why. Like I didn't quite understand yet, like, translation and all the things that, we know is important. So, and the acoustics, I had like acoustic correction, but the acoustics were terrible in those rooms,
Yeah, you can only correct so much.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nice. And then, and so is this, you're still in South Africa at this stage?
Yeah. So this was, I basically moved from my hometown, which is Pretoria, kind of more like a suburban town, to Johannesburg, which is like an hour away, but a little bit more kind of like things happening there. And then I went to study at like the SABC, kind of more like an internship thing, which the SABC is like the ABC kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
So there they, because I'd been, reading about, Neve 8068 consoles and SSL consoles and Neumann microphones and, all this gear that we lost over. And I basically went to the SABC because that was a professional recording studio. And there I got to, just because I was so, into it and had already kind of like been doing it for, 6 years or something like that. And I was just so keen that I just kind of got given a lot of chances by the lecturers. And there was great things that got recorded there, like the Soweto Gospel Choir won a Grammy. A lot of good gospel jazz. And like kind of commercial bands as well.
Yep.
So then I kind of got in contact, interned for one of the many times I interned for the person that would become my first mentor, which was Daryl Tor, who had won the Grammy for the Soweto Gospel Choir sessions. And he had a heap of Sama awards, which is kind of like the arias.
Okay.
And he was basically like the most in-demand kind of indie producer, recording engineer. Yep. And at that point, he was kind of transitioning from doing only recording and production to doing some like outside broadcast stuff as well.
Right.
So I got kind of thrown in because I had this knack for mixing into like mixing these outside broadcasts, which we were doing in such a gonzo way. Like we were literally taking like Pro Tool systems in like, trailers and just sitting in the back of a trailer with some headphones mixing, stuff straight off the stage.
That's cool.
And it was, pretty brutal kind of, I would say like a transition into the real world of being a professional, just absolutely brutal hours. And
sure. Yeah.
Like the live scene is just very different to, just recording your mates in your bedroom sort of thing.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So we had these days that would start at like, 3 a.m. You'd be driving down to Cape Town in like a little OB truck that was built by us basically.
Yeah.
and you drive through the night basically, and then you get there at like 5 in the afternoon, drink way too much, go to sleep at the festival, wake up, start working, work the whole day, do that for like multiple days. Just like absolutely brutal. But what I guess, got drilled into me at that point was just like a work ethic that I think is really important in this industry. Yeah. And also just, like reps, I guess it's called reps on the board or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
And the other thing that I thought was really important, just that I learned at that point was, we were doing festivals. So, some of the festivals we did, we had like these, like Deftones and Prodigy and these massive bands that playing there, and we got to like mix it, and but what I kind of realized was, the bands that play at midday, kind of starting off the set, my mix wouldn't change, like nothing would change of what I was doing. But then by the time the Deftones came, at the start I would be like, yeah, this mix sucks. Like, why is it so hard? And then by the time Deftones comes on, and it's just like you're getting this perfectly curated sound, like perfectly placed microphones on the cabs underneath the stage, and everything's tuned to perfection, the snare drums.
Yes.
And it's just, you're just getting this, and because they play every single day,
yep.
What you're getting is like, it's so hard to actually like mess it up, because it's
just a world apart. Yeah.
And that's what I kind of realized, like what we do is important, but it's not nearly as important as actually working on good music and working with people that can play the instruments and care, and I think
there's heaps to that. It's like obviously the experience is a no brainer, like the experience that people have and the skill and the abilities that they have every step of the way, each one of their crew members, all of that sort of thing. Like the better those people are, the more, they're obviously going to be hiring better people. So each step of the way, it just gets better and better and better. But like you said, the difference between, it's not even just amateur. It's just like the actual attention to what they're doing and the understanding of every little piece of that puzzle just makes our job so much easier. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I've just like over and over after that, and then you go back and that's like the experience you have, and then you go back to recording a local indie band who haven't done proper pre-production, and and then it's like, I guess it just gives you a little bit of perspective on, because I think, like anybody, or like a lot of people in this industry as well, you have a little bit of, or I have a bit of imposter syndrome every kind of new level I get to. And you realize like, it's not only what we do. Like you can't take something that's not good and make it good by engineering it. So yeah, I guess that's one of the most important things, just to actually find good bands to work with, or good artists or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, when it comes to that, like obviously the more exposure you have to, better quality bands, the better your output's going to be as well. And that means that you're more likely to reach a wider audience who's going to actually find out about who you are and that sort of thing. Is that generally how it worked for you? Is it very much a word of mouth thing where, you were exposed to these better and better artists and that led to more and more opportunities?
Yeah. And also just being in the right circles at the right time, I think is really important. There's this one book I read, Outliers. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
It's where that 10,000 hours thing comes from, and like, just how things that we're not really in control of have such a big impact on, how your life turns out and where you get to in your career. Like Al Schmidt, he was born in New York at exactly the right time. His uncle owned a recording studio. It's really, there's a lot of advantages there to actually becoming the recording engineer with 22 Grammys or whatever he has,
Totally, yeah.
So, I think about that a lot, but anyway, so.
But I think, the, like you said earlier, the work ethic and the commitment to your craft and trying to get better. And I think when you have that, like imposter syndrome aspect to it, if you do have that, it means you're being hard on yourself, which means you want to get better. And more likely are you going to then actually try and get better. Obviously, some people end up quitting because it might be seemingly too difficult or too many obstacles in the way, or just their outlook on life, I guess, can really impact that. But, I think like you said, the work ethic side of the things, once you see what it takes and you understand how to get better, you're more likely to push there.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like, it takes a long time to get good at, say, mixing. It really is, like, I really do believe, I don't think it's necessarily 10,000 hours, like different people have different levels of talent and aptitude for things. But yeah, it takes a long time to get good at something, like really good at it and understand,
And then when it comes to, the way that you actually do things, your process, obviously, so mixing, I would say, is that your main kind of where your percentage was before this year split up into? Is that kind of your main way of earning income?
Yeah, I did. Oh, well, I did a bit of teaching as well. So I did like one day of, well, actually just one class. So kind of like 4 hours of teaching a week, where I also taught like mixing and production. And then, I was basically just mixing, but I still mix, in the past 3 weeks since I kind of started talking to you, like I've mixed a few albums because it's just so busy.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
It just, it just gets so busy. And like this part here, I did not that much management stuff. So,
sure.
So,
take us through your process of mixing and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, well, it's really changed. So I'll just quickly go through the rest of my story of how I got to Australia and everything.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So basically when we were doing these outside broadcasts, but we're also producing bands and then Daryl got like a SSL console. And I remember one of the last sessions I did was with this guy for Converse Rubber Tracks and he was like a New York engineer, and I learned so much from him, and I learned so much from Daryl as well. So I think I just wanted to kind of like make the point that it's really hard to kind of learn by yourself in a vacuum, just watching Mix with the Masters videos. So I learned so much from Daryl, like. The period that I spent with him, which was maybe like 5 years or so, I learned so much more than the time before that when I was on my own. So, I got really a lot better, still not great at that point, but, learned a lot by assisting him. Then I moved to Australia and I, had a few mentors here as well. So I worked at Rec Studios where I was working with Tom Garnett, Ross Ferraro, Craig Wilson, and I learned a lot from them. And the real thing is like Australia's output is at a bit of a higher quality than South Africa because it's a bit more of an international, like Australia has more artists that feed into America and stuff like that.
Sure.
And a bit more of a richer kind of recording history and, So anyway, I was there. This was actually at 301 Castlereagh Street, which is where the OG 301 was.
Yeah, nice, yeah.
And then I started interning at the actual 301, and that's where I met even more kind of like mentors like Simon Cohen. But also importantly, like actually met the people. Like I'm literally sitting next to him. Here's Stuart. He's my friend and assistant, trusty assistant, like met people like that who, helped me kind of level up, in how much output I could have, not just, the kind of business side of things where, he was doing a lot of the preps and the revisions, and I was kind of doing the middle part of the mixing.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And, obviously being around so many different engineers and seeing things, especially at 301 where, there's a lot of people going in and out the doors. What do you, what do you think are the biggest things, or was there turning points or like that just made you level up?
It's just little like tips and tricks that you kind of learn along the way. Like I actually learned a lot from the mastering engineers, especially because the cool thing here was like, and I was at the old Mitchell Road property like 10 years ago, whatever. And someone like Steve Smart, like he masters something for you, but he doesn't just do it. He will call you into the room and like show you on the VU meter, like when, your floor tom is hitting and it's just taking up all the energy, sucking up all the energy out of the mix on the left side of the VU. And it's like, oh, okay. I never even thought about that. And I never thought of thinking about it like that, and it's just like little moments like that. If you're just around enough and, a nice enough person and good to be around, that people will start like kind of taking you under their wing and showing you things. And especially in a like community, like it really is a community, just the 301 thing. And, like I was at dinner last night with Simon and Tom Garnett and the assistant Brad, and like we just talk about like Pro Q4 and
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's
it's just the shit that you're interested in. Yeah.
Exactly. So and just that is like kind of how I feel like I leveled up, is just actually, because when I was at with Daryl, it was just kind of the two of us, and we were learning together, but we weren't like feeding off each other like other people that much. And then you get the clients like, you get the international artists through the door, and you have to be at a level where it's acceptable. Like if, like say Simon, when he did the Justin Bieber song or whatever, you have to be at a level where you're not getting in the way of the artist's process,
Well, what does that look like then? Obviously it's different for each artist, but is there commonalities between, the different people, and do you notice things that are pretty regular across the board for artists of that caliber?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this is exactly what Lewis said as well, but it's, the speed that people work with is just incredible, especially on those big vocal production sessions. And that's the thing, when you watch someone like Simon record vocals, if you're the artist in the booth, he's like psychologically pulling the best take out of you. So but if you're on the other side of the glass watching him work, he's literally comping a vocal take. He's got like the 5 different levels of, comps that he's doing while he's talking to you with, and you're as
crazy.
The experience that you're having in the booth is just total support and comfort, while there's like these incredibly complex, like, technical things happening behind the scenes. But it feels seamless. And the cool thing about a place like this is, because we have technical staff as well, and, everything is kept in good shape as well, which I think is pretty unique. Like, if you have an old console, all the old consoles I worked on before that were pretty badly in disrepair, like the old Neves, SSLs, where it's like, you don't quite know what you're going to get. It's like a lucky dip, whether a send actually works or not.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I guess the collaboration side of things, I want to touch on that. How collaborative is your work, and how much does someone else's input feed into how you do what you do?
Well, with mixing, I actually really like, especially with kind of indie artists, a lot of the major label stuff I do, you get given the thing and you send it back, and that's kind of the extent of it. But
Hmm.
with a lot of indie artists, I'll get them in and then we'll do the whole mix together after the prep. And I just find like, it's firstly, it's more fun doing it that way.
Yeah.
And then, if people actually know what they want, and we can get there a lot quicker together.
Mm.
And we can get to a result that someone actually wants, instead of
Yeah.
like me forcing my kind of vision of how I think it should be onto
Hmm.
your, you know, music. Instead of that, it's more like, I'm kind of like a conduit, and I'm just
Mm.
helping you to get to the way you hear it in your head is how
Mm.
I want it to come out of the speakers.
For
And,
sure.
and I kind of have the technical expertise to do it where you maybe don't. So,
Mm. Mm.
finding that like common language and, just communicating in a way to get that is what I really like. And then, the other thing is then I do like playing it. Like one of my great friends, Jack Garzonia, the wonderful Italian producer who was
Hmm.
also here at 301. Like we would just play each other mixes as well, and then
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
give feedback, and, like you trust each other. So, it's always kind of constructive.
Hmm.
And, that's kind of how you get better. You're like kind of constantly critiquing yourself, but in a way where it's like we're trying to improve.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like obviously you never know what you can get from someone, but you also don't know what you can give someone. And, conversations with creatives are like the most fun conversations because you can have, especially when you've got commonalities and things that you resonate on an emotional level, on a like creative level. We just love to geek out. I mean, I'm doing this
Yeah,
podcast because doing that exact thing. So
exactly.
yeah, it's crazy what you can learn. And yeah, like I said, you don't know what you can give someone else, even if they've been doing it for 20 years longer than you. You just don't know. And that's life. And that's what's awesome about this cool, fun like thing that we get to work on, that music is. Like it's
Exactly.
just this, it's seemingly like obviously it just exists in the air, but the fact that we can talk about it and get really passionate about it and find things that we love, even about the gear and like how you got a snare sound or whatever, like it's just
Exactly.
there's so much that we can resonate about.
Well, it's like magic. It's really
Yeah.
can feel like I mean I do a little of like meditation and stuff as well, and it's like that kind of flow state. Like when you play, I don't know if somebody plays sport and you're like in the moment, and
Hmm.
it's just everything feels effortless. Like you really can, like if you're mixing or even producing music. Like a lot of times I've had that experience where with I don't know a great artist in the room and they're recording and you're in there and you're like, fuck, I'm recording something this is going to be good.
Yes. Yep.
Like
Yep.
I did, I actually yesterday when I was putting that playlist together, I went and looked at my hard drives and I actually found like the Mac Miller session I did.
Unreal.
I found like the bounce that I had done, like the rough mix,
Hmm.
just like 4:12 a.m. and just
So
listen to
cool.
that. And I remember specifically thinking as I was recording that, like, this is like magic. And it's like everybody in the room feels the same way. It's like where this is as close to something spiritual or that I'm gonna get basically.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned meditation. Is there other ways that you get yourself into creative mode, or is it something that just you live and breathe it, so it's effortless, or do you have everyday things that you do?
Man, I think like I used to be pretty I don't know how to say it, like rock and roll about it, where it was just like, you know, drinking tequilas with the band. And then the next morning we go and we're all feeling terrible. And and we work till like 3 a.m. and then we do it again kind of thing. But, I'm like 38 now, so, and I have a baby and stuff. So I'm just, now I'm like really focusing on, doing the things that will make me be as good as I can when I'm actually doing the work, which is, I go to the gym, I try and sleep, I try not to drink too much, I try to eat right. There's the kind of like things that like maybe somebody who plays sport would also do so that they can perform when they're stepping onto the court or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it really does make a big difference when you feel good, like how you emotionally see the world, and then how you kind of like, you're like clear headed when you work on things, and that makes you make good decisions, I think.
And it's also funny how obvious it is when you don't feel good. I don't think when you're young you appreciate that as much because, like you said, you just kind of go, and you just go with it and whatever happens, happens. But when you get to a point where it's like, I need to be in a place where I can effectively do my job, not just do the job, but be amazing at my job and like show my clients how good I am at what I do and things like that. Like you realize when you're not on, when you've had a shit sleep or, you haven't been eating right or something like that you're just off and you're like, I can't do my job the way that I want to do it. And I think that's really, that's a big thing.
Man, people make fun of me for how big I'm somebody who likes to tweak systems and, optimize it. And I almost see myself as a system that I can optimize, because like, for instance, I have this thing that tracks my sleep and then you also import let's say like alcohol, for instance, is a pretty obviously bad thing for, how you feel. So, you say, oh, yesterday I had this many beers and I finished drinking at this hour. And then it actually shows you like what effect that has on your recovery. And it's pretty obvious like that it does that, but it also encourages you to just take that into consideration. Like last night at dinner, I knew I was doing this. I also knew I had a pretty important meeting at 10 a.m. with like pretty, people that I respect a lot in LA, like cool acousticians. And I was like, I'm going to not drink another beer sort of thing, have a good sleep and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's time for me to rattle off a few names. I've already mentioned a couple, but you've got some really, really big names that I want to get your insights on. People like Coldplay, Elton John, Katy Perry, Guy Sebastian, Delta Goodrem, some huge names, Daniel Johns. Like when it comes to working with these people, does your approach to working with these people change? Or, you mentioned speed earlier, but are there any other things that you pay attention to when you have a big session coming up or something like that? Or
well, I try and I try not to approach it in a different way than I would any kind of session. But I mean, those kind of big sessions, like I'll use an example, like I recorded Tony Royster Jr., the drummer.
He was amazing drummer.
He was playing drums for Katy Perry's touring band, and awesome. everybody that was in that band were just incredible. And like me recording drums at 15 in my parents' like lounge with a Tascam and 2 mics, and then how that kind of like got better and better. It was terrible. It sounded terrible back then. And it was my friend. He sucked. The drums sucked. The room acoustics were bad.
Yeah.
And then it's just like from there to like recording that guy in the biggest studio in Australia with a Neve console and all the microphones that you can dream of, and how good that was and how good that sounded. But all the work that had gone in before that like all the bad, there has to be so much bad to get to the better. And then it doesn't just go from here to here. You have to go through all that kind of like just mediocre and bad recording to get to something that, and then when you get to the point where what's that thing where they say luck is when opportunity meets preparation or something, one of those things.
Yeah.
It's like, you've been preparing for it for a long time without even thinking about it. And then when you get there, it's like, it just feels kind of like effortless, but it also feels effortless because the person that's playing is so good. It's really kind of hard to mess it up. If you put one good mic in front of that kid, he's like,
sound fucking amazing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's the difference. The other one I think about a lot is I recorded like a children's orchestra, and the difference between that and recording like this, we had the Sydney Symphony Orchestra here like heaps of times, and just incredible orchestras, and how like you don't have to do much. You just put up 2 microphones and it just comes out the speakers sounding like it would at the Sydney Opera House almost.
It's amazing.
Versus like in a kids orchestra, it's like, oh no, I have to turn this up, and you have to do so much to actually make it sound good.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like, once you get to the really big artists, you've almost, it actually feels easy because you've had to go through so much people that are not at that level to that point and trying to make it sound good. You know what I mean?
Has there been any situations where you've kind of felt out of your depth? And if so, like what did you do in those moments, and what would you advise if someone's maybe listening to this and hasn't done that and comes to a point where they're like, oh fuck, I'm a bit outside my, what did you do and what advice could you give, I guess?
Oh, I would say you have to search out the situations where you feel out of your depth, because if you don't ever feel out of your depth, that's the imposter syndrome thing. Like every time you go up to a new level, you're going to feel a bit of imposter syndrome because you don't quite understand all the rules. And, at this new level, it's like, like let's say you're recording for major label artists instead of kind of indie artists. Like speed becomes much more of a factor than it is there when you're just hanging out with your friends or whatever. And that's something you don't quite know. Like you don't know that one day you're going to have to be so fast at Pro Tools shortcuts, So I think it's really important to kind of like seek out situations where you feel super, uncomfortable and be like, fuck, I don't know if I'm good enough for this sort of, and then you just do it, and then it kind of just always works out, really, I think.
That's cool. And, you've done recent work in Dolby Atmos as well. I want to kind of broach that topic. And has working in Dolby Atmos, has that changed your mix process? Is there now new ways that you approach mixing because of having done that, or?
Yeah, Atmos is interesting because like I was the same as a lot of people, just like, oh, yeah, okay. And then at one point it just became obvious to me that this was going to be a thing. And I really kind of like almost like I actually bought the speakers, that 301, and 301 was like hiring them for me,
Yeah, right.
So I really took like a pretty good big gamble on the whole thing. And yeah, I really enjoy it. Like I remember listening to those Beatles remixes, very controversial, but it sounded awesome to me. And like on a Sonos system, my dad had like a Sonos system, and we were like listening to these songs we've been listening to our whole lives. And we were like hearing organs that we'd never heard before because it was buried in the mix.
Yeah.
And then there was a period there when it was pretty, radical. And a lot of those mixes have actually been replaced, which I think is pretty funny.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess to answer your question, I learned a lot about stereo mixing in that I would get mixes from like internationally famous engineers. You know, one good example is I got his John Costelli mixes. He mixed the Kimbra album I did the Atmos for. And, you know, he had done on my reference playlist, I had our lead talk, best kick sound ever. You know, a lot of his mixes were on my mix reference playlist, and I had no idea how he mixed. You know, even though I listened to him and Matthew Rad talk on that podcast that they were doing during COVID. But then I got to actually open his Pro Tools sessions and literally see how he mixes.
So sick.
You know, like, and that's something that people don't think about. Like, you know, we're getting the stems for all these massive pop songs, and just you can kind of like, you know,
reverse engineer it,
just poke around a little bit, and you kind of like hear how it's mixed, and that has made me a better stereo mixer because, you know, I'm actually seeing, you know, although you can, you know, watch mixes of the masters or something, but it's not quite the same as actually
as having the session.
Yeah.
Exactly. What stood out to you? What were the things that, you know, maybe made you readdress how you do things?
It's almost just like a confirmation of the things that it's like how little is sometimes being done. You know, just these like very small little dips at 3K or whatever. And it's like, I really did, like in my mixing journey, I went from being very heavy handed at the start. And then as the music got better, because, you know, like when you work on music where it's not at, you know, the most elite standard possible, you have to help a lot. But then as you kind of get to work on better and better music, you can just kind of like back off. And then sometimes when you get something that's really well produced and well put together, it's like the less you do, the better, you know?
Well, I was going to say about your mixes, you know, listening to your playlist that you sent through, I noticed firstly that each song has its own personality that could be due to the production style or the artist's influences and things like that. But I think what I like about your mixes is, one, they're crystal clear and you can hear absolutely everything. But the fact that, like you were saying, being light-handed on the mix, that's evident to me, and it shines through it, lets the song speak for itself. Is that something that you're really thinking about when you're mixing?
Yeah, I think it's also just like your taste. Like I really like, for some reason, I mean, the music that I like, I nowadays like things like War on Drugs, and it's kind of like almost muddy in a way. It's not really, but it's, you know what I mean? It's not so clear and punchy, but the way that
not overproduced.
Exactly. The way, but the way that I hear music, and I really can't almost help but do it in this way, is I want to be able to hear everything, and I want things to be quite punchy and transienty and loud and just clear. And it's also just that thing about translation. You know, that's one of the things I've really kind of learned along the way, is it doesn't really matter what it sounds like on the $200,000 speakers I'm mixing on. It matters what it sounds like in the mall, or even on the airplane on those terrible headphones that they give you, where the noise floor is so high, you have to like fit into this tiny little dynamic window here for anybody to hear anything you've done. Like I can't have something be down here. Like nobody will ever hear it.
Yeah, I love it. How much does the rough mix have to do with the way that you end up mixing the song? Is it pretty much how you get the pre-mix stuff? Is that pretty much ready to go, and then you're just finding your own way to add embellishments and things like that? Is that how it works?
I feel like nowadays it's almost like mixing, I guess, like mastering and mixing together, where because people have access to the tools, like you're not mixing from the multi-track, you're mixing from something that's They've already put EQ on it. They already have a master bus. It kind of sounds the way they want it to sound, you know? So you really don't want to, it's almost like the rough mix is the roadmap that shows you like, okay, they want to go to, this is the destination. And they're like showing you the roadmap. Then it's not there yet, but it's like, okay, it's kind of showing me what it wants to be. It just wants to be more of what it already is, you know?
Yeah, I like that.
Because
cool.
The rough mix normally has some kind of magic, and the artist has already lived with it for so long. If you give them something back that's like radically different, they're not going to like it. It doesn't matter if now that the vocal is actually the right level, you know, objectively.
It's almost
speaking.
not the same song, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that's what I also like about those, you know, those 50s or 60s, you know, mixes where the tambourine is so loud and it's just like baked in there. It's never ever going to change, you know? Yeah. And that's cool. Like it's part of the vibe that tambourine is that ridiculously loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, I sometimes hate it when people will listen through a mix so many times and just, it's like anything that kind of like pops out as being wrong, you know, it's like, yeah, we got to fix that. It's like, no, but that's kind of what makes it cool, you know?
Yeah. You got to keep the character in there for sure.
Yeah.
100%. Now we've talked about, you know, the things that have gone right. What do you kind of see as some of the main challenges about, you know, whether it's music industry related or more just how you do things? Like what are some of the challenges or like difficulties of being a mixer, do you think?
Well, I could talk about, I mean, the difficulty in being a mixer, I guess, I would say the Australian indie scene is like there's not that much money to be, you know, like if you have to kind of live a normal life, pay rent, support a family, that kind of thing, you know, it's not necessarily the path that'll, you know, help you get there sort of thing. And it doesn't, you know, whatever level you're at, like there's obviously pop mixing where it can be sustainable in a way, but I actually kind of like to have, you know, this other thing that I do, and you know, the design, the studio project management, that stuff is kind of helping me to be able to keep doing the mixes that I really enjoy doing because it's creative, like artists that are, you know, coming up and not just having to do things for commercial reasons, you know. I find just the business side of it is not that I enjoy the business side and figuring out how to do things in a way that it's sustainable and, you know, it's a project. You're doing a project. It has a timeline, has deliverables, it has a budget, and it's a business. Most of us are like sole traders and we're trying to do, like, we're doing marketing. We're basically running a business, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that sometimes, I guess what's challenging about it is that initial magic from, you know, when you're a kid and you're just recording with your mates in your bedroom, and it doesn't matter if it's commercially viable or not, you know? It's just fun. It's just, we're just messing around. The fact that this is distorted to all hell makes it more fun, sort of thing.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think just you mentioning that is like, I think of this like computer mic that I used to use to like record my guitar amp and like my vocals and stuff. It was the worst microphone of all time. And I remember if I yelled into it enough, it would distort. It was full on clipping, but I loved how it sounded. To me, it sounded like, I don't know, it just sounded gnarly, like Nine Inch Nails style distortion, but I didn't realize that it was just digital clipping. But it was like, it was the coolest thing. And I didn't know why it did it, but it just did it. And I was like, that's how I want this to sound now.
Exactly. And that's like, you kind of lose a little bit of that I don't know. It's almost like, I think, a lot of people who work in the technical part of creative, like let's say you're an editor for movies, you just start like noticing too much of the editing in movies and you're not actually following the story of the movie
Yep.
anymore.
Yep. Yeah, or it's like you're at a live gig and you're hearing the sub frequency and you're like, that's too loud. Yeah, like it takes you away from the experience. Yep.
So it's like that is challenging to me. Is just trying to reconnect with that, I don't know, innocent magic of not really knowing what you're doing, while in the back of your mind being like, okay, I know that I need to take 0.5 decibels of 3K out of this thing. But I also want to put a tape machine on it and just smash the shit out of it or whatever.
Yep. Oh, that's funny as. I love it. Well, awesome, man. What's coming up in the new year and what are you looking forward to doing?
Well, we're actually kind of, for 301, we're looking for a new space, which is pretty exciting. I'm helping someone build a studio. So I'm learning a lot about just project management and actually, designing the layout of a studio and that kind of thing. And just a lot more, hopefully, a lot more mixing, really, hopefully.
Yeah, cool. Nice one, man. Well, the last question that I like to finish off with is, if you could give some best bits of advice to, first of all, producers, engineers, mixers, that sort of thing. And then secondly, for any artists that might be checking out the podcast.
I guess my advice to like young producer engineers would be to find some sort of community, like the MPEG community. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Because it's hard. Like it's become harder and harder with, big studios closing and, the natural communities that were there before, it's become a little insulated, and a lot of it's online. I'm on like that, on a Discord that kind of like spun off that Live with Matt Rad podcast, which is really cool. And I've literally met some people on there, like this one guy Rory who just mastered the new Kendrick and Lana Del Rey and Taylor Swift, and like talking to him over like DMs, and he's literally like one of the biggest mastering engineers in the world. Yeah. And then he put me onto this acoustics company, and like that kind of, it's not, you don't necessarily need to be busy. Like you're in Melbourne, I'm in Sydney.
Yep.
The MPEG, like the other night, that thing that you were on, that's like a control room where there's people all over. There were people in Brisbane, there were people in Sydney. It's just like finding a community, and then it's kind of like what I liked about my journey in Australia, for instance, is I found like a group of artists and producers, and then kind of grew with them. Like this producer I work with quite a lot called Finbar. So he produced a lot of the stuff that I mixed, and then he's just working with different artists, and then he's recommending me, and then we mix it together, and and it's just awesome. Like that's the best
what I was going to
thing.
say. How good is that? Like making music with your mates, like for a living. Like
exactly.
Yeah. So why would you want to do anything else? Yeah.
You're all kind of just like rising together instead of. I think it's hard. Like a lot of people think like, hey, I have to go work with the most famous person you can think of, but it's not that. You find people at your level, and then you kind of grow together, whether that's other engineers and, just people you can talk to and feed off of and stuff like that.
Yeah. Nice. And then secondly, for any artists that might be listening?
Artists. Selfishly, I'd say it's the same thing. It's like basically finding, like Kendrick Lamar saying, mixed by Ali, they were friends and then they came up together, It's like find people that you trust, and you should find people that complement your kind of capabilities and talents. Like if you're more creatively talented, like I did a lot of work with my friend Jack here, and he's very much more focused on the music and creative part of it when we produce stuff together. And then I become almost more like the engineering, very listening more intently. And when we work together, and then Simon Cohen records the vocals, and you get people that are better at this specific thing, and then by the end, and that's how a lot of this, pop. Like we do a lot of work with Warner, and where it kind of through the whole process will come through the studio. Like they had a room here, the producers would be there. We're friends with the engineer, and then Simon records the vocals, mixes it. I do the Atmos, and Leon does the master.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
So it's finding your team, I guess, and just rolling with them.
I love it. Well, this has been awesome, man. Thank you again for joining me.
No worries.
It's been good to meet you finally, and having a good chat. I can resonate with. So I was going to say this after the podcast, but I don't care. I'll say it now. It's like I resonate with so much of what you said. Like I grew up almost the exact same way. Right. I had a Tascam recorder. I listened to punk rock. Like started playing in bands, recorded people in their houses, like all of that shit. So funny.
That's awesome.
But so good. Well, thanks again. And thanks to all of you for checking the podcast out. Do all the classic things, follow, subscribe. That obviously keeps you in touch with what's going on here at What's That Sound, and do your best to share it around, speak to a friend about it, share it on your socials, all that sort of stuff actually really, really does help. But that's all from me today. Thanks again, Stefan, and thank you for checking it out. We will see you next time on What's That Sound podcast. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.